Perfect. We are starting the stream, loading. All right, we are live on YouTube.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jabbar Shumate, and I'm Vice President for Community Convening and Social Justice with the Oklahoma City Urban League. And I'm here with our manager in Community Convening and Social Justice, Ms. Sarah Perez. And we are here to bring you a forum tonight focusing on candidates running for the Board of Education for Oklahoma City Public Schools, along with and in partnership with Scissortail Development Corporation. Want to say up front, tonight we had two candidates confirmed, Wilfredo, and Sarah, if you'll help me with Wilfredo's last name, Santos?
Yeah, Santos Rivera.
Santos Rivera and Mr. Charles Henry, who are both vying for the chairmanship of the Board of Education for Oklahoma City Public Schools. Wilfredo has not been able to make it, and we haven't been able to get any response from him. He confirmed, but we have not heard from him for tonight. And the other candidate, who is the current incumbent, let us know that she would not be able to make it. Nonetheless, Mr. Henry has made himself available, and we think it's important to make sure that you all hear from someone who really wants the opportunity to serve as leader of the board. Gotta just make this clarification that the Urban League of Oklahoma City does not endorse any candidate, but we have every responsibility and right to make sure that our community is informed about those that want to lead. And so we felt it necessary to move forward to hear from Mr. Henry. And if the other candidates join in, we will definitely allow them the opportunity and space to share. I want to say on behalf of the Urban League and Scissortail, we all focus on community-oriented goals like improving education, job, and wealth creation, and helping families gain economic power. As well, I'm going to go ahead and serve as the moderator for tonight, since we just have one individual running for chair of the school board. Just really set up and ask a series of questions. Want to make sure that you all know that the date of the election, first of all, is, Sarah, help me, because I don't.
The date of the election is February 9th, and early
9th.
voting begins Thursday.
Actually, I had this written down, but I just wanted to hear Sarah's voice. And so we will have our Board of Education primary races. And in that race, I do believe that we will have the opportunity, if none of the candidates clear, because it's three candidates, if there is none of the candidates clear over 50%, we move on to a March. Is it a March? Or
April
general election. That too is in my notes, but I'm getting older. So without any further ado, I want to start by letting Mr. Henry just kind of give introductory comments and really start, Charles, and just give us your background, and as well, just why you think you're going to be the best person to serve as chairman of the board for Oklahoma City.
Thank you, Mr. Shumate, for the opportunity. Thank you, Ms. Perez, for being here. I'd also thank Valerie Thompson as well with the Urban League. I actually served with the Urban League Young Professionals about 20-something odd years ago. Don't want to tell my age, but currently I'm a long-time resident of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I'm a product of Oklahoma City Public Schools. I'm a graduate of Northwest Classen, class of 1987. So I did show my age. I went to the University of Oklahoma, got a bachelor's degree in political science, a minor in communication, and another minor in history. Went to law school at Texas Southern University, graduated and came back here, and I'm a practicing attorney in Oklahoma City for over 25 years. I'm a father of 3 children, a son 6, a daughter 14, and a daughter a daughter 15 and a daughter 16 that will be 17 in March. So I am a very proud father of my children. And so I have always been engaged in Oklahoma City, engaged in the community. I think I'm best to serve as the Oklahoma City Board Chair because I want to make sure that the board is accountable to the people. I currently serve as District 1 School Board Representative for Northwest and Northeast Oklahoma City. Some of the schools I have are John Marshall Middle School, Britton Elementary, Ridgeview, Quail Creek. And so those are the schools that are in my district. And so I serve those schools. And so what I do normally is I take a hands-on approach with the schools that I serve. So I usually talk to the principals. I ask them what they need. If they say they need teacher allocations, more teachers, I am like an intermediary where I work with the district. I can't make the school district give them more teachers, but I can be a voice for those schools and those administrators to do, and those parents as well. Because a lot of times you have classes that may be overcrowded. And so parents may request certain things. And so I'm able to help. So when it comes to issues of teacher allocations, repairs, we have MAPS money for that. Make sure those get done. I help facilitate a parking expansion of one elementary school. Safety working conditions, particularly for cafeteria workers. There are leaks in the lines, the cafeteria lines where they serve the food. So just for instance, the cafeteria workers were having to carry hot water with their hands from one area to another. And so we had the money in the account and nothing was done. And so we had scanners for food. We had problems with elementary students not getting back to class on time. So I helped that, and security issues as well. So I kind of take a hands-on approach with my district, and I kind of want to do the same as the board chair. And so later on, I can kind of tell you what the duties are as a board chair. I think that's one of the questions, but I just want to serve. I think I can be accountable to the people. I want to bring transparency back. I want to make sure I hold the district accountable. Right now, the district is not being held accountable. The last evaluation we did with the superintendent, the score rating was 1 to 3, and the 1 was adequate, which means that if you perform well in an area, I could score well. If I thought there was an area that was below satisfactory, I can only score him satisfactory. So the scores are not necessarily where they should be. I was a voice of that. I think we need to be more transparent. That stuff happens kind of behind doors and not in a public setting. So I believe that it's good to keep a superintendent, but the superintendent, we have to make sure we hold everybody accountable. I want to make sure that I hold myself as accountable as a board chair and board members as well. So accountability is very important, and transparency is very important, and listening to the teachers, listening to the parents and the community partners that we have. I think that I can do that. And if we can do that, we can be more successful.
Great. I would like you to talk about, we know that in the school systems, there are great, what we would call inequities, that inequities still exist in our system today, in our educational system today. What are some things you plan to do if elected to start the process of fixing those inequities and those issues that still really face many large public districts like Oklahoma City?
Yeah, that's a great question. 4 years ago when I ran because I wanted to make sure that schools had the resources, not based on their enrollment number, but based on the need of the students. That was kind of a precursor to what we have now, which is our equity policy. And so I was very influential in getting that communication out to the public. One of the inequities that we have, obviously, is academic performance of students. We have students in certain schools that are low performing schools that don't have the resources and the support needed. And so I want to make sure that I lower the achievement gap between the majority of low performing schools and those other schools that may be higher performing schools. Our district is over 50% Hispanic, Mexican, Latino, about 20-25% African American. We get increased funding for students that are bilingual students. Those bilingual students comprise a large percentage of OKCPS kids. We are not using the increased funding for the purpose of what it's supposed to be for. So we have bilingual students. I'm hearing stories that they have to go to one school, but because they don't have the resources at that school to make that child proficient in math or whatever, or English, or whichever class it is, they have to take a bus from the school that's in their neighborhood to go to another bus. And so sometimes children are consistently missing class. And so sometimes they don't even go to the school where they can get the bilingual services that they need, and they stay in the school where they are. And so they're really not being as productive as they should. So we need to make sure that our Title III money goes where it's supposed to go and our state money goes where it's supposed to go. The State Department of Education, they handle that money, that increased funding money that's allotted to school districts. And so since Oklahoma City Public Schools is one of the highest school districts, obviously we have a higher percentage of Latino Mexican students than other districts have. And so they do not earmark that money for that purpose. So since the State Department of Education does not earmark, then the local school agencies are able to do with the money. They're not able to do with the money, but the money is not necessarily going where it's supposed to go. And I'm not just saying this because I'm saying this. I'm saying this because this is the feedback that I get back from credible people. So we need to make sure that the funding goes where it's supposed to go. And so that's one of the main concerns. We want to make sure that we are supporting our traditional public schools. My children have had the opportunity to go to some really good schools, public schools, and some non-traditional public schools. But I want to make sure that where every child is located, that they have the same opportunities. And as a board member, I've seen the inequities that go on. There was one area in the Wheeler district where they were formulating a charter school, and they were doing it because they said they wanted to do it for English language learners. I was the only board member that spoke up and asked questions. I found out that the range of purchase price for the homes were between $200,000 and $700,000. So I knew the money wasn't going for disadvantaged students. I also looked at the geographic boundary zones that they were going to create for this particular school, and it cut off right at the Wilson Rogers public housing unit. They said it was accidental or coincidental, but they cut it out. And so I fought to make sure that those children would have the opportunities, because I don't think it's fair that you have a school so close, no matter what kind of school it is. If it's a great school, and if it's a public school, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, children that are coming from disadvantaged communities should have access to that particular school. And so I want to make sure that happens, and I want to make sure that happens at all schools. So you hear a lot about Northeast and me talking about Northeast. We started the Northeast issue regarding the admissions issue, not because of names and colors. That was the district had promised those alumni that would be something that they would decide at a later time. When I first started about the Northeast issue, it was in regards to admission policies. I wanted to make sure that children that were across the street from that school, which was going to be one of the best schools in our state, that they had access to it. It's not fair that they don't have access to it. So an application school is a selective admission school. And so people like me, my children can benefit and other people can benefit, but some parents don't have access and the knowledge of these schools. And so if it's a selective admission school, it's a different story. So some of the inequities that we were dealing with the Pathway to Greatness was that in class and school, you had to take a placement test. I think you had to score like on one area 75% or 80%. Well, most children that come from certain backgrounds, they just utilize their state test scores. Their state test scores are the most difficult scores. But Classen had an internal test that they can use that was easier than the state test scores. Now, if you're not a parent that's privy to that information, you won't have that information. So what happens is a lot of times children get locked out of opportunity. So if I'm a parent and I trust in my system versus me, and I send my child to a Montessori school, and then my child gets to go to Nichols Hills Elementary, but another parent relies on their school and their child did not get to go to some type of early intervention program. And then they go into the school system. Our school system is not capable and does not have the structure to provide a quality education because we don't have a structured discipline policy. We need to support our teachers in the classroom. The teachers surveyed a couple of years ago said the main issue was disciplinary issues. So we need to modify our student code of conduct to make sure that we're in line with other school districts across the nation and how we handle this. There are things like PBIS methods and things that we can use in order to help kids be more productive in the classroom. Once you have a structured discipline policy, you can also have what you call quality in-school suspension or quality detention programs, because that child is still in an academic setting and not at home, but also it helps you to identify if the children have any mental health needs, any kind of issues at home. So we need to be more broader. And also I want to span the student structured discipline policy and the student code of conduct to have parent involvement and parental accountability. So the parents would read, these are the issues, these are some of the things that can happen. These will be warnings. These are the, is one of the main issues with our discipline issue is disruptive infractions. So children being disruptive in class, that's the main issue. But there are other issues that are more serious and some that are even more minor. And so, it's about 29% of the disciplinary issues are from disciplinary infractions. There's 15% that's in the other category. So you go on about 40% dealing with some form or quasi form of disruption in classroom. And so we want to make sure that that structure, the parents understand what's going on so they can be engaged. And this is the most productive thing, because you can have all the great ideas we want in a school system, but if you don't have a structured policy regarding discipline and making sure that teachers are supported in managing their classroom, then none of the ideas we have will work. And so we're not holding our district and our superintendent accountable for academic performance, but you have to hold them accountable for the school discipline issues. I have parents that tell me that they're afraid to send their children to school. Can you imagine if you were afraid to send your child to school because they feel like they may be their physical safety is in danger? But those parents don't have the money for private school or the knowledge or the options to try to apply, or they didn't apply early enough to get into that feeder system to get into schools like Classen, Independence Middle School, Belle Isle. So to go back, that parent that has that child in just a regular daycare, they may have done the best they could. They go to our elementary school, they don't get the structure they needed. They come out 2 or more grade levels behind, and that's the norm. Two or more grade levels behind. They go to middle school 2 or more grade levels behind. By the time that child so if they're in middle school and they're 2 or more grade levels behind, if they try to get into a selective admission application school, obviously they can't qualify because they're at a disadvantage versus the parent that was able to put their child in school. And then by the time you get to high school and you're 2 or more grade levels behind, you're either going to end up dropping out in the juvenile justice system or prison.
Thank you. That was great.
I have another question, Charles. So you talk about how really the inequities and disparities that exist in terms of children falling behind, but we know this COVID slide is real, especially in Black and Brown communities. And we know that if we have students in some of our schools that are not performing as well already behind, the COVID slide is going to put them that much further behind. Yesterday, you had the governor say and really call out public schools for saying kids need to be back in the building, but we're in a global pandemic. So I would really want to know, you leading Oklahoma City Public Schools, dealing with the realities of and the inequities in education and the children that are behind, knowing we're in this global pandemic. What's your answer to really address that as the new challenge?
Okay. Well, first, I would like to say that as far as the issue with the pandemic, I've always been of the mindset that we need to defer in-person instruction until the remainder of the semester. We gave the superintendent back last March the latitude to have some type of authority to be able to handle issues that came up with this pandemic, but it actually turned into him having the authority to make the option on his own of whether or not we go in school and not, and the power was taken away from the board, which was not the intention of giving him that power. I've gotten several emails and calls from teachers and parents over the last few months. We said, okay, if it was 25 cases per 100,000, we won't have in-person instruction. Then it went up to 50 cases per 100,000. So we went to school for like a couple of days, and then it got to the 50s. And the whole time I was telling them, this is the data, this is where it's going. Now they've abandoned that. And at some point about a week or two ago, we were at 100 or so, three-digit numbers per 100,000. So we were at the highest area of our pandemic. We have vaccines. They're going to take time to work. Our teachers haven't been given all the vaccines yet. Some students, may not show symptoms, but they are being cared for by elderly parents, grandparents, or even great grandparents who may have pre-existing conditions. So I want to say that, first of all, that I think that we should defer any in-person instruction until the remainder of the semester. By the time the next school year comes around, I think, the vaccines will start to work and we'll be in a better situation where maybe we will be able to have in-person instruction. The inequities, as you say, is because it's a pandemic, students are already struggling, they're going to struggle more. As a board chair, we have money from the government, Title I funds, for one of the main platforms that I have is quality remediation programs and coursework. We have not made a commitment to remediation. If you have a child that's 2 or more grade levels behind, you can't keep teaching them at the grade level where they are. So if you have a 7th grade math teacher and all the children, or you have 24 to 30 students in class, and those children are predominantly on a 5th grade level, how can a 7th grade math teacher teach 7th grade math? You basically can't really teach. And because there's so many disruption issues, the key quality of a teacher is that they can know their student. And if their student has any deficiencies in any areas like math or science or reading, that teacher can work with that child on those deficiencies to get that child caught up. But that's hard to do when you have disruption in the classroom. And so when you have that situation, those are things that cause inequities. And so with the pandemic, it's just going to make it worse. But a lot of people say, well, that's why we need to get back in school. But I think safety is first. So we need to have a plan to use that Title I money for what the purpose of it is. We also have Title II money that goes, not only, it's kind of, one part of it is for teacher training, teacher recruitment, and professional development. But a lot of that money can also be used, grant money can be used to help as far as helping teachers and also helping students that need remediation. So you have Title I funds, you have Title II funds, you have Title III funds for Hispanic students. And so we have those. And so we also have community partners as well. And so we want to make sure that we do all that in the proper manner. So using our resources like we're supposed to use them, especially since our district is over 50% Hispanic, that has to be the primary concern. So we have to make sure that we use those resources for that, because if you look at one particular class of students that will suffer the most, it will be that, because a lot of their parents don't speak English. Some of their parents may not have a state driver's license to drive. And so there are issues that are going on. And so we need to make sure that we have funding available. And so if we use our resources appropriately, and as a chair, I'm supposed to, as any board member, we're supposed to be able to talk to the administration, get open transparency about where the funds are used for. We get graphs and we get general information, but you kind of hear later from teachers and administrators that we don't have the funding, that the funding is not going for where it is. They're saying that we have a counselor in every school. We don't have a counselor in every school. We have a counselor that's probably assigned to different schools, but they're not in every building every day, full time. And so we just need to be more open about what's going on with the issues. They're tough challenges, and sometimes the answers we give the public are not the best answers they want to hear, but the public should be reassured that we're giving them the honest answers and that we're doing the best we can.
Charles, hey, we want to thank you for honoring your commitment to be here tonight, but I got another direct question for you.
Okay.
Charles Henry wins and becomes the board chair of Oklahoma City. The Urban League and everybody is participating tonight. Our job is to hold you accountable. Tell us your 30, 60, 90-day plan, what we're going to see from you as chair.
The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I let every board member know that they have a voice just like I do, because the chair's position is the same position as the board member's position. The only difference is we set the agenda and there's some administrative matters we handle. So I have the same power as any board member. You mentioned a great question, because it's not going to be easy. The first thing I'm going to do are put items on the agenda that need to be addressed. So one of those are going to be the disciplinary issues. So right now, if parents or citizens have issues and concerns that they want to come to the board, they used to be able to do it in public comments. Those have been restricted where everybody can't come and present their comments. But if we put certain parents or teachers on the agenda, not only can they have public comments, but there can be a back and forth engagement, because in public comments, we can't converse. So they can ask questions back and forth. And this is held in a public setting, because as board members, we have a quorum. So we're supposed to do this stuff publicly. And that's another issue, that a lot of things, they have strategies and they have certain ideas that they want to have, and they wait till about a week or two before the vote to kind of put it out in the public. Then some public members are scrambling to come to the board members. They can't make comments. That's not the strategy approach. My first 90 days is dealing with transparency and openness. So we're going to deal with the main items of discipline. We're going to have teachers, representatives from the teachers union. We're going to have parents with their stories, board members. What can we do and to modify the student code of conduct? I'm an attorney as well, so I have some legalese that I can work with. So internally, I can work with the district and get their ideas about why or why not we should do this or do that. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to focus on. Also, I'm going to create an advisory committee to hold the board accountable, but it won't be just professional people like Mr. Shoemate, well-respected people in the community, but it'll be parents, teachers, and community leaders like you all as well. So I want to make sure that we all have a voice and the voice is heard and that those particular board members are accountable. Now that could be set up like each district could have a certain committee. So you can have committee members that are in District 1, 2, and so on, and they can meet, or we may just have a general committee. Before I do something like that, because I campaigned on it and because I believe in it, I like to get open ideas about what that advisory committee looks like, how you feel it functions. I do have an idea how it should, but instead of me doing something, I need to be more accountable to that. So I want to create that as well. I also want to make sure that we work with our media relations, because there are a lot of stories with Oakland CPS that are front page stories that never get out. We need to make sure that the media is held accountable and they're more transparent, because these parents are having issues and concerns. And so we want to make sure, so if there's some type of committee that we can set up to make sure that the word gets out. So when we have things that need to be brought to the attention of the public, that information can get out. Because sometimes the stories don't get out like they should. Sometimes I'll get interviewed and I'll give this long speech and long story, but then in the paper, they just have like a sentence or two. And I've talked to them about 5 or 10 minutes about some really important things. And so we need to be a little bit better about that and make sure that our media is held accountable, and to make sure that the media holds us accountable as well. So that's the main thing. So we also, what I want to do is make sure that anybody has any concerns with me, I'll hold public meetings. They can ask me any questions. I think we need to have open forums about how they feel about Pathway to Greatness, the direction, what are the issues are. So the school administrators are there because they have a job to do. They're working really hard, and we need to make sure that they're there. Also, it's a lot of research as far as making sure that our Title I money, Title II, 3, and 4, the monies are being appropriated and used as they are. So as a chair, I can be an intermediary and a voice, but I want to make sure that other board members have a voice as well. We're all the same. I have the power of putting things on the agenda, which is a pretty powerful thing, but I want to abuse that power by not using it. I will make sure that I'll use it. And when citizens when they maybe gone to the district or gone to their board member or their concerns that they're having, they can bring those concerns. I can put that on the agenda. They can speak. They're not limited to 3 minutes. There's back and forth engagement. There's accountability. If there's not a quorum, because of the quorum issue, it's good to do it in a public setting, but sometimes you can meet with people separately too, but we can't make any decisions on how to vote. And so I want to make sure that those are some of the things that I want to do. But my main focus for the first 90 days is handling the disciplinary issues. That will be my primary focus, and making sure that the advisory committee is there. And also remediation. So remediation programs, I know that's going to take some time to work. And just to piggyback on that, we had a presentation a few years ago about remediation, and you would be alarmed at the percentage of children that graduate from Oklahoma City Public Schools have to take remediation coursework in college. So they're going to college, taking courses that they're supposed to take in high school or to pass in high school, and they don't get any college credit for it. And so I remember when I first started 4 years ago, the valedictorian in one of our high schools said, and I hate to say this kind of stuff, but people need to hear it, but he said that they didn't have a math teacher, and that subject was going to be on the state test, but they didn't have a teacher to teach that. There would be somebody who just come in, a coach or somebody, and just kind of manage the classroom. But that was something that happened a lot. And so that's why I was a very strong proponent of the need versus the numbers, which is kind of what equity is. Ruth Villes has kind of been the main proponent of this equity, and the equity framework that she has is a much broader perspective, but the perspective dealing with the need versus numbers, I was a strong proponent of that and a strong voice for that. And so I think a lot of the ideas that I had in my voice actually helped change and kind of move that equity policy forward. Now, some people may not give me credit for that, but you can go to the public meetings and listen to it. I was always a strong proponent of that.
That leads me to another question I have for you. You mentioned that Oklahoma City is, without question, a majority minority district, that the majority of students actually that are in our district are Latino or Latinx. Would like to know, when we look at the board itself, which all the members of the board are elected, it doesn't represent the demographics or the look of the district. The folks making the decisions don't mirror that. When you look at the executive cabinet for the district, doesn't look like the majority or the demographic breakdown for the district. If you were to look at the teachers who are hired there, you don't have it to be representative of the people who are recipients, who are the actual customers receiving what you're serving. I want to know on all levels what you feel what you're going to do about that. What is you being in this position going to do to change that if you think it needs to be changed?
Well, yeah, the first issue is getting people that look like the students in those positions. But before you do that, the people that are currently in those positions, we need to make sure that we have implicit bias training, because we all have implicit biases. And so sometimes when people hear that, they get offended, but I have implicit biases. We all have implicit biases. Even in race, as a Black man, I may have implicit biases, but we have to be honest about it. And when you're honest and open about it, you can make changes about it. So we need to have somebody that's actually certified to be able to teach, somebody maybe with some national type of certifications and exposure, because this is a crisis in our area. And it's something that we need to do. There's title money for that should be used for that. And so if we can get implicit bias for the board, then we can get implicit bias training for the executive staff, get implicit bias for the school teachers, and that'll help our district as a whole. So that would be the first thing, is to make sure that we get that. We need to make sure also that our teachers look like our students. And so that Title II money is for recruitment, but we have to make Oklahoma City a better place. And so we have to make sure, and it goes back to the discipline issue. If parents know that we've taken care of the disciplinary issues, a lot of those parents won't leave. They'll come back to our school district. It is about funding and leaving the state, but a lot of teachers will stay. But it's hard to stay when you don't have even though we did increase our funding, we don't have the funding that you can make more money in another state. Plus you have to deal with all the disciplinary issues. Some teachers may retire or go somewhere else. So we have to deal with that as well. But our students should look like our district. We should definitely have to have, and I say Hispanic, Latino, and Mexican. So I want to make sure that that I'm correct, but I want to make sure that we have more teachers that look like those students, and then those African-American students, and then we have Asian students and white students as well. So we need to make sure that our schools reflect and our board reflect. Now, we do have some administrators on the executive cabinet. The deputy superintendent is a African-American male, and there are 2 other people as well. But you're right, when you look at the overall cabinet, and even if not on the cabinet, there are still people in important positions, and it doesn't always look like us. So the main thing is, I'm saying, I'm not trying to take your job, but you all need to get implicit bias training. I'm the board member, chair member. I should not be in a situation where I have the authority to say whether you stay or don't. Now, that's one of the reasons I'm running, because I think what's been happening over the last 4 years is the board chairs kind of overstep their responsibilities, and it's caused a lot of disruption. And so I want to make sure that I'm transparent. I can be a facilitator, and I can work with schools and make sure things can happen a certain way, but I should not have any control. I hold the superintendent of the district accountable, but I can't tell him or her or this person how this is going to be done. I'm just a board chair. It was a chair was created by state law. I think for a district with so many people in the population, so it's just us and Tulsa, maybe Norman as well. And so you have a chair position. So we have 8 positions. And so I want to make sure I use it the right way. So the main thing, Jabari, is just you have to be a voice. You have to bring it to their attention. You have to have implicit bias training. You mentioned from the board, you mentioned from the executive, the teachers as well. And so we just have to do a better job. So once we have the structure needed, then we're able to provide. Now, also, one of the things I wanted to do 4 years ago was I had something that I wanted to do in conjunction with the city government and community partners, having a city sales tax possibly called teachers and textbooks. I announced it at a board meeting. When I announced it at a board meeting, a few weeks later at another board meeting, the current board chair announced the same thing. Didn't notify me or tell me or said that she was doing it, but it wasn't the same way. So I think that's something that we need. I'm not saying that we definitely have to do it, but a city sales tax to whereas we can give maybe I would say a $15,000 supplement to teachers' salaries. So it would not affect their promotion status evaluations. It's just a supplement that's separate, and the money would go directly to the teachers. Because about 4 years ago, when they did that city sales tax, that money was not earmarked to go towards teachers. That money could have went right to the general fund. So that was kind of misleading to people about teacher supplements, and they were going to use that money just to use it for the overall budget if they could. We don't need to do that. I think the voters would vote for city sales tax if it was specifically earmarked for teachers. And I've talked with the chamber about this 4 years ago. You can have a city sales tax if it's for salaries. There are certain things that but you can do it for salaries. And so, and I want to make sure the money, again, will be earmarked for teacher salaries. So that'll be a $15,000 supplement. If that could be over a 10-year period that we can commit as a city, that'll give the school district time to get things working. Maybe we can pass a bond that would be more beneficial to Oklahoma City Public Schools. And then, if the city wanted to, hopefully they wouldn't have, after the 10 years, they wouldn't have to do it, because we can increase our numbers. We have strong schools. We're going to build strong neighborhoods. And so once you start doing that, you start increasing student enrollment in schools. Once you start increasing student enrollment in schools, things will get better. But I think right now we're so reliant on IEP students getting increased, bilingual students getting increased funding, that we're not using the money though for the purposes. We're using it for the overall budget, and that's not really what it's supposed to be for. So, I don't think all the IEP students should be IEP. The goal is for them to be back in the normal classroom. But if we do that, there's maybe less funding, but that should be what the goal is.
That's a great question. I want to go back. You have some very specific ideas around behaviors and unwanted behaviors, and really discipline strategy in schools. But the reality of it is, especially in some of our low-income communities and Black and Brown communities, those kids walk into our building with upwards of 7 ACEs, 7 adverse childhood experiences when they come in the building, meaning that they walk in the building with a great deal of trauma, a great level of trauma. Probably the number one form of trauma the students face when they walk into one of your buildings is they are the child of a parent who's incarcerated. So there's a great majority in the district you represent currently, and in districts especially of Black and Brown children whose parents are incarcerated. And then there's also all of the other adverse childhood experiences that one might experience from our communities when they walk in the building. So when we look at issues of discipline, are we looking at a trauma-informed instructional experience for those children? Are we understanding that if we don't have teachers that understand and are trained in trauma-informed instruction, then we could probably make situations worse with our approaches to discipline?
Yeah, well, one of the things with the policy I have, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what are we
the policy I have is to be inclusive of mental health. So that would be one component of the discipline policy. And so what that looks like is, first and foremost, we all need mental health. Mental health can be, first in general terms, all students need mental health, particularly in this pandemic. students need mental health. The issues is the diagnosis. What is the trauma? Is it diagnosis versus environment? So the State Department of Health had stated that they were going to provide mental health services. And so some of the issues that I had was that some of the point indicators was if you come from a single parent home or if you come from poverty, impoverished conditions, those kind of things. So there's trauma. I look at it in two ways. And I think this is the way the health community looks at it. There's trauma that's environmental. There's trauma that may be from mental disorder, or, you can suffer from anxiety, any type of depression, or, things of that nature. So the problem that I had is we were targeting Black and brown kids for trauma based on environmental factors, not necessarily on mental factors. So when you do that, if that child is diagnosed with trauma, but this Department of Health and our community partners through Title Resources have to be able to diagnose the child in order to get funding. So that's kind of where the problem is, if you have to diagnose the child to get funding. So we want to make sure that children are not misdiagnosed, because if you're diagnosed and you get older, and on your application, life insurance application, different applications, they ask you, have you ever been treated for a mental illness? You have to say yes, and so you have to be very careful with that. If you get in the juvenile justice system and you're in an encounter with law enforcement and they see that you have some diagnosis, it could be a situation where a judge can send you to a facility versus sending you home with services. So we have to be careful as a school district, because that information will be used. I'm a strong advocate as a criminal defense attorney for mental health. So mental health is not just mental health, depression, or schizophrenia or some mental health disorder. It is things dealing with mental functioning, but we have to be careful when we're dealing with environmental functioning, because if you're saying a child is suffering trauma from poverty, if you take the poverty away, you may take the trauma away. Now, there may be things impacting that child from that experience, but you've taken the immediate factor of that away. So the student code of conduct policy, if you have it in it, basically what it can do is it can identify those children that need whatever type of mental health services they may need, because it can identify if you need somebody that has mental health. And I'm not a mental health expert, so I want to make sure that I have mental health disorders. It can be learning disorders, which is not necessarily mental health. You have to deal with issues that are behavioral, impulse control, all kinds of different kind of mental factors. And so you have to be able to properly identify those. And I just don't want to make sure that our children are just being diagnosed based on these triggers of single family home, parent, if you had a parent incarcerated, that was a trigger too. And so those are all important. But the issue is, is a child suffering? What are they suffering from? Is it some mental health issue? Is it an environmental family issue? Is it a past experience issue? When you find that out, then you can give the child the proper care and needs they can have, and also the proper services they have. So I want to make sure that we do it the right way, and not just bring community partners and everybody in here, because who's going to be affected? Most of these, when I was watching this meeting, it was just pretty much they were using words like reduced lunch. So those are just code words that I knew is going to be Black and brown communities. And so, and whether you're from a Black and brown community or not, we should make sure that all children are given the proper services. And we just don't say that these children suffer from mental health, because one of the issues with the low academic performance of our schools is they're saying they're going to put mental health strategies into that to make sure that we increase academic performance. But that's not really the case. It's not just issues dealing with that.
And I think we're gonna move at 7:17, so we're gonna move to you just giving us closing remarks. But just want to make people mindful, as great as it is to do and have all of our staff and teachers, or those that come into contact with children, do implicit bias training. It's also vitally important that your teachers are trained in trauma-informed instruction, because there is a great deal of still teachers who who see children that act out but don't understand the issues underlying of why they're acting out, and they're missing key instructional time when if we had teachers that were equipped to understand the unique challenges that a child comes into their building with, then I've seen educators work through that from the time they enter the door and then be able to move that kid on educationally to success. And all too often, we don't think about the challenges that, you know, children come to our building with. And if we're not thinking that way in a space where there are far more children who might come in your building with those challenges, then we miss the opportunity to really help that child reach their potential.
Well, I think the key point.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Henry.
The key point of what you're saying is, as a chair, when you tell me that as a public citizen, I listen to what you say, it makes sense. And then I take the information and I implement that into that particular student discipline policy. The problem is the reason why, one of the reasons why I'm running is you make great points, but nothing changes and the policies just happen as they're supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. When you tell me that as a board chair, that makes absolute sense. And I'm supposed to use that information, take it back to the district to make sure that the teachers have this training. If not, are there funding for this training? You know, how can we implement this into this policy? This is important. Have people like you come to the board meeting and speak about that issue, get into a conversation, or maybe meet with some of the board members or the district officials, you know, at the administrative site. So that's what I'm saying is, I'm a chair. I listen to what you say. It's not my way or the highway. You know, it's not because I think this is the best route, we're going to do this, or this is the cheaper route, or because the administration say, let's do it this way. We have to make sure we do it the best way. So when you have ideas like that, I take those ideas, and as a chair, it's very simple. It shouldn't be a hard issue, because once you listen to everybody and you exchange ideas, sometimes the majority of people will at some point come to an agreement on what that decision is. But when you're not being transparent, there's, you know, key disparities in how things happen. Then people feel like they're not heard, they get criticized. That kind of, you know, damages the reputation that we have as a school district. So it's just common sense to me. When you hear common sense, you bring it back, you work with it to get it done, and it's not a hard job.
Well, I got one bit of common sense, and it's that my partner in crime, Sarah, has been trying to say something for a while now. All right. And I'm very cognizant that if she's not happy, none of us are going to be happy.
All right.
No, I was just going to comment on Jabbar's like kind of question to you, because I think that while like working in the diversity space, we see like, you know, let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about getting more Black and brown people involved in our movement. But I think the other part of being trauma informed is also making sure that when you do realize what that person's home life is that the shame is not there. Because, you know, they might say something to you that's like would feel off the wall to ever hear that, you know, you saw guns on the table, you saw, you know, different drug paraphernalia, and not to shame that child and to kind of dismiss them. And so I think when you are looking for someone to do these trainings or even have these conversations with your teachers, and I think it's part of that recruitment process you're talking about, is looking for the right person and also marketing ourselves to the proper people who are really going to want to make change in these Black and brown communities with these different types of students. I mean, and not even just assume off the bat that these people come in with trauma in the door. Some of them, you know, definitely do, but also not putting the kids who maybe need a different type of discipline, a different care over into that big lump sum. So I like hearing, you know, kind of that's rolling in the back of your head.
That's good. And see what you say, I hear. As a chair, I'm supposed to listen, because you make great ideas, and we need to make sure those ideas are implemented in whatever strategies or policies that we have. If we don't have policies that address that or addressing that in the right manner, we need to address that. If we do have policies, we need to have board meetings to find out what the progress is or the lack of progress is. So whenever I hear ideas that are great ideas from our public citizens, you know, it's my job to make sure that information gets passed over, that we look at that and we make those decisions. Because at the end of the day, when you're dealing with children in trauma, you don't want the child to continue to go through the same trauma and not get the services that they need. At the same time, you don't want to miss and diagnose what those services are, because some of those are environmental, some of those are mental health, some of those are a combination of both. So you have to have
So
experts in that situation.
what will happen for you to know that these changes and the policies and procedures are actually working? How will you see it? What will be the thing that you use to measure that impact?
The first thing is, before you have the policies, we do what we do here. We engage in conversation and meetings and research to make sure we have the right policy. You look at other school districts that have done the same. You talk to your mental health experts, you talk to your parents, and so you make sure you create a viable strategy. Once you do that, and at some point there are board meetings with that too, to hold the public aware and get their opinion. Once you implement the policy, you review the progress. So sometimes we have policies, but we don't come back to the board meeting to see where the progress is, or if there is not any progress, what's going on. So that's how you hold us accountable. That's how you hold the administration accountable. And so when we talk about, mental health, trauma, remediation, discipline policy, whatever issues there are, the thing that I have as a board chair is I can place that item on the agenda, and then those persons can speak particular to those issues, and we can engage in back and forth conversation. The administration one of the important persons, or the personnel that are in those particular areas, have to give a presentation to the public about where we are, and then we can ask them questions. Because right now, there are not a lot of questions asked. And so a lot of times I'm getting interrupted by a board member because of another board member. And it's usually like two, they play a game, or another two, and they try to cut me off from asking strong questions, because we have to ask the strong and tough questions in order to make us better and to make the public aware so that we can be better as a school district. And so we have to be able to have those tough questions answered. Why is this policy not working? We have this issue with students that suffer particularized trauma. Where are we in this issue? These schools are saying it's working here. These schools saying it's not working. This grade level saying they have these issues. This grade level saying that they have these issues. So it can go either way.
So I'll do one more question, and then we can let you do your closing remarks. But
Okay.
My question is, how, in Black and Brown communities, the word trauma, mental health, therapy, those are all sometimes can be received as like really scary words or bad words. How do you get past those obstacles with them when the parents come in kind of, guns a-blazing, questioning why you're accusing their children of these scary words?
That's a good question. That's twofold. The Black community, there is an issue about mental health, and so you have to educate parents on what this is. So having parental involvement and engagement in the process of trauma. So when you're creating this process, parents need to be involved in that process. You need to talk to parents. You need to talk to some parents where some of our administrators saying their child suffers from trauma. How do they feel about it? You need to engage them. But also that goes back to implicit bias too, because a lot of times Black and Brown children can be targeted with trauma, but if they were white, they wouldn't be trauma, and sometimes students that are from more affluent families in some of our non-traditional schools have a higher suicide rate or suicide ideation rate than some of the traditional public schools. So we have to be very careful about trauma and how we use trauma. So in anything we do, you have to look at it that way, because I look at things from my perspective as a Black man. And I know that when I saw the presentation, when I saw all those triggers, I knew that I talked to people about it. And so when I mentioned those concerns, I wasn't just saying these are the concerns I had, but these were things that people in our school district and outside administrators and people in the mental health field saying, these are some of the issues with what they're proposing. And so that's what I brought back. And I didn't get any answers. So we have to be very careful. So we have to educate families, because mental health, like I said, we all need mental health. It just depends on what level it is. But when you start talking about diagnosis, we have to make sure that we are doing that the right way. Because if you don't do it the other way, you can have a Black child with a law enforcement encounter with a law enforcement official, and they may have a background on their child for certain areas, and you never know what can happen. There was a 9-year-old child today on a video that got pepper sprayed because she had some mental health issues. And they knew that when they had the call and they went there, and they still handcuffed her and pepper sprayed her. So it wasn't handled in the proper manner. And so we just need to make sure that that is done in the right way, because trauma versus environment, trauma versus mental health disorder, there can be the same, they can be concomitant, they can be the same thing, but not necessarily. If you take poverty away, you may not have future trauma, but you still may have mental health issues from your past experience. So we have to understand what we are targeting. And so what I'm afraid of is that State Department of Mental Health is just going to target these children, because you can't get funding without the diagnosis. So we want to make sure that we're diagnosing kids the proper way. It's not just something for funding, but it's something because we have to do what's in the best interest of that particular child.
Charles, you got 2 minutes. We want to make this close out at 7:30.
I'm done.
You're good. Hey, I want to just say before we close out, Sarah, kudos, hats off to Charles. He was the only candidate that kept his commitment in the race for the school board chairmanship to be here with us. And I want people out there listening to remember that this is a man that keeps his word. If he says he's going to be somewhere, he's going to be somewhere. The other candidate said, we will be with you, and they're not here with us. Thank you, Charles.